So back into geometry. We've had a look at how to convert certain units, but we're going to just look through the different metric units in dimensions to see what the conversion rates between them are. First of all, length then, which we have mentioned before. The smallest unit is millimeter, written as mm. We've then got a centimeter, which is 10 millimeters. The meter, which is 100 centimeters, and then a kilometer, which is 1,000 meters. So moving on to area, because an area is a unit times a unit, think of the millimeter squared is a square that has the width of a millimeter, and we know that the surface area of a square is the width times the width squared essentially. So the smallest unit we can have, at least that we need to know about, is the millimeter squared, because that would be a square with the width of a millimeter, the sides are the same length, so we got a millimeter times a millimeter, giving us a millimeter squared. Now the next one up, unsurprisingly, is the centimeter squared. But there's not 10 millimeters squared to a centimeter squared, and this was some people get tripped up. You have to think of a centimeter squared as having as a square. So one of the sides of the square is a centimeter long and hence is 10 millimeters, but the other side of the square is a centimeter long and therefore 10 millimeters. So when we multiply 10 by 10, we have 100 millimeters squared. So a centimeter squared is actually 100 millimeters squared, not 10. Going on further from that then, a meter squared would be 100 centimeters along one side and 100 along the other, giving us 100 times 100, or 10,000 centimeters squared. And then finally, a kilometer squared is a huge square with 1,000 meters down one side and 1,000 meters up the other, and hence it's 1,000,000 meters squared. This process then gets even bigger when you're talking about volume. Our smallest volume is a millimeter cubed, but we know with the dimensions of a cube, the volume of it is the width times the length times the depth, but as they're all the same, it's going to be the width times the width times the width. So if you've got 1 millimeter, it's 1 millimeter times 1 millimeter times 1 millimeters in the dimensions of a cube. But when we're talking about the centimeter cubed, the sides of that cube are 10 millimeters long. So we have it as 10 times 10 times 10, width times length times depth of that cube, giving us 1,000 millimeters cubed per centimeter cubed. Similarly, the meters cubed is 100 times 100 times 100, giving us 1,000,000 centimeters cubed. And then the kilometer cubed is a massive amount, giving us 1,000 million meters cubed, so a huge volume. Finally then, a last little reminder is that the other unit of volume you have to know about is a litre, and the equivalent of that in centimeters cubed is 1,000. So those are all the conversion rates you have to know for converting metric units. And remember, we don't do imperial units in this specification.